The whole picture.
Hello there, I'm Heidi Adams. Welcome to Africa 54. Here is what's coming up. 45 days and counting. Israelis march on Jerusalem to demand action on the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza as the enclave slips deeper into crisis. Ghana's president pushes for a united front and an action plan on slavery reparations at an African summit in Accra. And multi-award-winning South African rap artist Sho Madjozi speaks to VOA's Heather Maxwell about creating unique African sounds that global audiences will love. All those stories and more coming up on Africa 54. And we begin our broadcast in the Middle East, where the United Nations has stopped deliveries of food and other necessities to war-torn Gaza, while warning of the growing possibility of widespread starvation. Internet and telephone services in the territory have already collapsed due to a lack of fuel. The communications blackout is now in its second day. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees said Friday it's been unable to bring in its aid convoy. A march calling for the release of all hostages held by Palestinian militants in Gaza proceeded Friday towards Jerusalem. Thousands of relatives, friends and supporters of the hostages participated. Friday marked 42 days since at least 240 Israelis and foreign nationals were kidnapped from Israel into Gaza during the October 7th Hamas attack on Israeli communities. Well, elsewhere in Gaza, thousands of bodies are likely buried in the rubble in the besieged territory. Many families are digging to retrieve them, often by hand. Khan Yunis is located in the southern half of the Gaza Strip. Tens of thousands of people displaced from the north have already sought refuge there in schools and tents, causing severe overcrowding amid shortages of food and water. Two-thirds of the Gaza Strip's population of 2.3 million have been made homeless by the war, and every available space in Khan Yunis and other southern towns is already packed with people. Well, here in the United States, President Joe Biden is under increasing pressure to rein in Israel's military campaign against Hamas, with concern mounting about the high number of Palestinian civilians killed. VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Singh reports for us from the State Department.
The Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, has become a focal point of the Israel-Hamas war. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health released video, it says, shows patients being moved inside smoke-filled corridors as Israeli forces raid the large hospital compound, one building at a time. The Israeli army released video that it says shows Hamas weapons and military equipment it found in the hospital. Hamas denies it is using the medical center for military purposes. President Joe Biden said that the first war crime committed by Hamas was stationing its weapons and fighters in, under, and around hospitals.
Israel did not go in with large number of troops, did not raid, did not rush everything down. They've gone in, and they've gone in with their soldiers carrying weapons or guns. They were told, let me be precise. We've discussed the need for them to be incredibly careful.
The health ministry says more than 11,400 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the war. The conflict was triggered by the October 7th massacre by Hamas, which Israel says left 1,200 dead. Asked when the war would end, Biden had this to say.
With regard to when is this going to stop, I think it's going to stop when Hamas no longer maintains the capacity to murder and abuse and just do horrific things to the Israelis.
At the State Department, a reporter asked spokesperson Matthew Miller why the president is not calling for a ceasefire, saying polls show many Americans support it.
We don't make our decisions based on polls. The president and the secretary have come to the judgment that a ceasefire at this time would only benefit Hamas.
One expert told VOA that increased U.S. military support for Israel has broad bipartisan support among members of the U.S. Congress. And she said the U.S. could use its leverage over Israel to reduce the number of Palestinian civilians killed, as Israel targets leaders of Hamas, which the U.S. has designated a terrorist organization.
For example, one of the things that we've heard over and over again is that U.S. officials are recommending that Israel use smaller bombs that have a smaller impact on collateral damage. Collateral damage is civilians, includes civilians.
Israel ordered Palestinians to leave 4 towns in southern Gaza on Thursday, raising concerns of a possible expansion of the war into areas that Palestinians from the north had fled to for safety in recent weeks. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Now, since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas, Jewish settler attacks on Palestinians have increased. That's according to a UN report. In the southern part of the West Bank, more than a dozen villages have been destroyed. Farmers have been evicted from their land, and more than 1,000 people have been displaced. VOA's Jan Borchardt has the story.
Amount of rubble, personal items, and destroyed furniture used to be the home of 2 Palestinian families in the herding community of El Mathagara until 2 weeks ago. One day, Jewish settlers who lived nearby arrived with guns, trucks, and a bulldozer, according to those who live here. In minutes, they say, everything was gone.
The first attack was against these houses. The settlers came dressed in soldiers' clothing and started attacking and destroying everything. We never saw something like that from the soldiers. Before, we received a warning letter, but this time, the settlers just came in soldiers' clothing and destroyed everything.
Hamanda says his family has lived on this land in the Hebron Hills for centuries, herding sheep and cows and cultivating olives. The settlements, he says, are getting closer and closer. And with the war between Israel and Hamas, Hamanda says things now seem to be out of control, with threats and violence.
I feel humiliated. I feel insulted, to be choked out, to be so badly treated. Not by Jews, because Jews, we have been living with them. They are good people, but by these Zionists who come from everywhere in the world, who know no religion or ethics.
According to the UN humanitarian agency OCHA, at least 15 villages have been destroyed since the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel, and more than 1,000 people have been displaced. The Israeli government press office and the Israeli Defense Forces declined to comment about the increasing number of Jewish settlers' attacks against Palestinian farmers. In the last weeks, the Israeli government began the distribution of thousands of rifles and handguns for civilians who live in border areas and in settlements in the West Bank.
We are going from place to place, giving out these firearms. This saves lives. Every rifle, every pistol that we are freeing up with the issuing of licenses can save a family. Every firearm, every assault rifle can save a residential building. I tell the citizens of Israel, go arm yourselves.
At this Bedouin village that shares a fence with a Jewish settlement, things are getting worse by the day, the residents say. They say they have been threatened to leave the area by the settlers and are living under a kind of siege.
It's 2 weeks. They came, settlers militia entered, actually invaded the community in a very horrific way, and they detained all of the youth in one tent in the community, and they were interrogating us very violently. It was like something that we just see terrorist people do.
People here say that before the war, they would call the Israeli police to solve any problems they had with the neighbor settlers. But now, they say, nobody comes to help them anymore.
Jan Beauchamp there, and he joins me now. Jan is in East Jerusalem for us. Good evening, Jan. Great reporting there. What do people in the West Bank tell you about the extent to which this war between Israel and Hamas has now spilled over and, confirmed their worst fears that it would come to their doorstep?
There's a growing concern here that this war could come to the West Bank, that things will get out of control there. There's a lot of violence since the attacks of Hamas against Israel on October 7th. More than 200 Palestinians were killed so far by the Israeli forces and also by Jewish settlers' attacks. There's also a very concerning economic situation in the West Bank. Things are getting harder and harder. More than 150,000 Palestinians who used to work in Israel are unemployed right now. And there's a growing concern that the Palestinian Authority could lose control over the situation there. And you can see, talking to people there, that the support for Hamas and the support for the confrontation against the Israelis are just growing in the West Bank.
Well, Jan Beauchamp, thank you so much for your reporting. Please stay safe, and thank you so much for joining us. That was Jan Beauchamp. They're speaking to me from East Jerusalem. Well, let's move to the African continent now. Africa needs a united front and an action plan on reparations for slavery and colonialism. That's the view of Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo. He was speaking during a reparations summit in Accra this week. VOA's Anthony Labruto has more.
A call for compensation to help right the wrongs of the transatlantic slave trade, in the place where about 10 million people were taken more than 400 years ago and shipped to the Americas. For more than a century, Ghana was the center of the British slave trade. Now, its president, Nana Akufo-Addo, is at the forefront of Africa's push for redress. Akufo-Addo opened a reparations conference in Accra this week, stressing the need for a united front and a global action plan to address the legacies of slavery and colonization.
No amount of money can restore the damage caused by the transatlantic slave trade and its consequences, which have spanned many centuries. But surely, this is a matter that the world must confront and can no longer ignore.
Political leaders, academics, legal experts, and rights activists from across Africa came together to discuss the impacts of historical injustices, from colonialism and slavery, as well as the way forward for Africans and peoples of African descent around the world. Western leaders, in breaking with previous narratives, have moved to acknowledge the wrongs of slavery and the colonial era in Africa. Many European museums have begun repatriating stolen artifacts to African countries. But their willingness to pay reparations remain frustratingly vague for African leaders today, as many countries have yet to acknowledge their true roles in colonial Africa. So far, only Germany has agreed to pay specific reparations for its role in the 4 years genocide of the Ova Herero and Nama peoples in Namibia during the early 1900s. President Akufo-Addo also used the conference to build bridges with Caribbean leaders grappling with the legacy of slavery.
The effects of the slave trade have been devastating to the continent and to the African diaspora. The entire period of slavery meant that our progress, economically, culturally, and psychologically, was stifled.
Leaders are expected to create action plans and committees to implement Africa's action plan for reparation. Anthony Labruto, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Kenya's parliament has given its support to deploy 1,000 police officers to Haiti to help combat gang violence. This decision comes despite a court order temporarily putting the deployment on hold. The person who approved the motion cited Kenya's responsibility to assist other countries in need. For more insight, VOA's Paul Ndio spoke to Dr. Edgar Gatua, an international relations, security and diplomatic expert at the U.S. International University in Nairobi.
Prime Minister Ariel sent out a plea for help some time back and he's been saying we cannot govern Haiti because of this gang violence and these gangs that have taken over very important infrastructure. And Kenya answered the call, and using through the Security Council, it approved. For the first time, I am saying Kenya needs to send the right soldiers, the ones who qualify and who have tasted battle, who are combat ready, who can handle this. If we go choosing through corruption a ragtag team, we're going to come back in body bags, Paul. Kenya will be embarrassed. This is our chance to shine on the global stage, to go and show that we can handle this.
The Haitians are okay with foreign troops coming in, but the gangs have made it clear. They have said under no circumstances should any foreign troops come into their country.
There is this gang leader called Barbecue. That's his name, yeah. Barbecue has been on record saying we will deal with any external force in the only way we know how. Remember, he's been a chief of police. So within his ranks, I am sure he has very well trained people, militia.
Looking at the politics back home,
Yes.
is this something that can be settled? Because right now, as we speak, there is a whole court order stopping any further engagement on this issue.
The court issue, for me, I am looking at it positively as an opportunity for the government, through its attorney general and its lawyers, to argue its case and to put forward a case to the Kenyan public and to the whole world of its preparedness and how it arrived at this decision and what informed its confidence levels that it was going to send soldiers to go. If Kenya can start preparing on that, regardless of whichever direction the court rules, I have a feeling that will go in a long way in making the Kenyan people more comfortable with the idea of sending our boys and girls across. Because like you rightly said, Paul, if we walk into this blindly, and if we think of going to use our African brutal tactics.
That's a good point. Kenyan police is notorious for brutalizing its own people on the streets. Are they going to do the same thing in Haiti?
Now that Kenya has made a public commitment, our president has gone out on a limb and committed himself and said and agreed we are going to send our forces. It is too late to backtrack right now. What we now need to do as Kenya is make sure we send the right police force with the right training, with the right mindset. They need to be told this is not business as usual. We are carrying Africa on our shoulders. It's not just Kenya's problem. This is Africa and East Africa's problem. So we are let us be brand ambassadors for Africa. Let Kenya go and do the right thing, and then anywhere else, any other part outside Africa, if there is a problem, they can be like, let's get those African soldiers. They can make a difference for us. So it's a big opportunity for Kenya. It's a make or break moment for Kenya and Africa also.
And that was Dr. Edgar Gatua, an international relations, security and diplomatic expert at the U.S. International University in Nairobi, speaking there to my colleague Paul Ndio. Well, still to come here on Africa 54, Heather Maxwell speaks to a multi-award-winning South African rapper, Sho Madjozi, about creating African sounds for global audiences. We'll be right back.
Journalists are often frustrated as they report on current events but have no capacity to influence change. But with solutions journalism, reporting can go beyond just covering what is wrong in society by also sharing positive and realistic perspectives on how people can solve widely shared problems. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will discuss what solution journalism is. We will also hear from experts on ways to use solution journalism as a way forward for Africa. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
Welcome back. Let's take a look now at other news from across the African continent. Ethiopia's only foreign-owned financial company, Ethiolease, is set to shut down after 4 years. The company was the first and only foreign group to obtain a financial license from the National Bank of Ethiopia in 2019 as part of reforms to open the country's tightly controlled economy. And Madagascar's incumbent president, Andry Rajoelina, has taken a commanding lead in the presidential election, which was boycotted by the majority of candidates and marked by low turnout. Preliminary results show the 49-year-old former DJ with 71% of the vote so far. Final official results are due at the beginning of December. Well, our correspondent Philip Crowther has been following the APEC summit this week in San Francisco and has this report on U.S. President Joe Biden's comments to the leaders gathered at the summit.
We're not going anywhere, U.S. President Joe Biden said here at the Asia-Pacific Summit when he made his case to national leaders and CEOs. His message that the United States is committed to high standards in trade and to partnerships that will help economies across the Pacific. It can be easy to forget that Biden's original foreign policy priority was reasserting American influence in Asia, but that was before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and before Israel and Hamas descended into bloody fighting again. With each new crisis, it appeared that Asia was slipping further down that presidential to-do list. But this week was a rare opportunity for Biden to demonstrate otherwise. At this annual summit of Asian leaders in San Francisco, he could finally refocus on the continent that he sees as key to the future. Biden had come here fresh off his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and told business leaders that the U.S. was de-risking and diversifying, but not decoupling from Beijing. But he did not mince words in suggesting the U.S. and friends in the Pacific could offer businesses a better option than China. We have real differences with Beijing, he said, when it comes to maintaining a fair and level economic playing field and protecting your, meaning other countries' intellectual property. Now, APEC summits are about trade and economic cooperation, so Biden spent time letting Indo-Pacific leaders know that the U.S. is committed to economic ties throughout the region. He also met jointly on Thursday with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. Japan and South Korea have been historically bitter rivals, but the two leaders have been trying to get past decades of tension because of those shared concerns about growing regional threats from North Korea and China. Now, reminders of conflict in the Middle East were kept on the periphery of this week's summit. Protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza shut down all traffic heading into San Francisco over the Bay Bridge on Thursday morning. The summit will end here in a couple of hours' time when the United States officially hands over the chairmanship of APEC to Peru. Philip Crowther for VOA News, San Francisco.
Philip, thank you. Well, entertainment news now. Multi-award-winning South African rapper Sho Madjozi spoke with Heather Maxwell. She's the host of VOA's Music Time in Africa. They met at the annual African Conference for Collaborations, Exchange and Showcases in Dar es Salaam.
The Music in Africa Access 2023 conference held in Dar es Salaam featured over 14 showcases from across the continent by artists such as Bonga Flava superstar Mario from Tanzania, The Lost Men from Ghana, Kasiva Mutua from Kenya, and the Madalitso Band from Malawi. South African rapper Sho Madjozi's performance was spectacular. The Huku and John Cena hitmaker sat with me and shared a few secrets of her recipe to success.
Some man I act rough like John Cena, some man I get tough like John Cena. He used to be cool when I used to come through, now you wanna act tough like John Cena.
Can you speak about the significance of preserving cultural identity?
So when I was in South Africa, at that time, there wasn't a prominent Tsonga artist within the mainstream space that was making music that was a combination of South African and East African. So I took South African beats and I put Kiswahili lyrics on them. I studied in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
For 4 years. I think it's actually very important to see yourself from outside. When I was in the US, I realized that, for one, I was not happy being in that society. It felt as though the work had been done. And I missed being from a place where it felt like we had so much more to do.
Your style contributed to your success and set you apart.
There's a lot of artists, these days, right? Like a lot of artists. And so how are you going to be differentiated from everyone? And I suppose my style really did that a lot for me. Anyone can push boundaries. Like you can go right now into your studio and make literally anything. You could hit these two bottles together and record it. You know what I mean? The real question for me is like how do you make new stuff and have that stuff translate to a bigger audience?
Right.
I think that's the question. How do you introduce a new genre and then people embrace that?
Okay, let's go with that then.
So it's about taking something that is known, that exists, but like putting it into a new context. When I blew up, which was 2017, which is when I started, Huku imetoka 2018. So around that time, there was, in the US, the Migos were really big, including other rappers, but the style that was really popular, Mdaile, it was this style of rapping in triplets. So they'll be like, Versace, 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 Medusa, head on me like I'm Illuminati.
Versace, Versace, Medusa head on me like I'm Illuminati. I know that you like it. Versace, my neck and my wrist is so sloppy.
And that was the style of trap. I took that style of rap and I put it on Gom and I put it on Kiswahili. So nikisema, kwani mnataka Madjozi aje amanini? Umeona? Kwani mnataka Madjozi aje amanini? Nye hamialiki. Mbona mwenzaka anasema nanipenda laki? I'm actually rapping like the Migos, if you listen carefully. Medusa head on me like kwa nini mnataka Madjozi aje amanini? Nye hamialiki. So you guys will be like, wow, why do I love it? I can connect with it, while at the same time, it's actually taking a trend ambayo tayari ipo.
I'm Heather Maxwell from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and this is Music Time in Africa on the Voice of America.
Oh, sounds like a lot of fun. That was South African rapper Sho Madjozi speaking with VOA's Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell. You can join Heather next Friday for a report on the live music scene from Nairobi. And that is it for us this week. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. There's more news there too from all of us here in Washington. Have a splendid weekend. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.